So I'm going to now turn the time to the speakers today. I'm going to first turn the time to Daniel London, the Executive Director of the Lincoln Trail Area Development District. He's going to speak for a few minutes, and then we'll turn the time to Representative Samara Hevron, who's going to talk about some things that are being done at the state legislature, really exciting things, so that'll be a great discussion. And then we're going to turn the time to Brian Nottingham of TPMA, one of those two, to talk about what the study indicates and some recommended actions. I want to just recognize our partners in this as well. So we were one of the sponsors of this study, but also Alltech Baptist Health, the college, ECTC, and United Way and Hardin County Chamber. So we're grateful for all of them for their sponsorship and their support of this project. So without further ado, again.
Thank you, Kurt. Appreciate it. All right, it's always dangerous when I get the microphone. As a washed-up politician and former Baptist, was Judge Tall, if I'd met your pastor before, I'd still be on the back row of every group because he's awesome. I'd still be a Baptist. But nonetheless, I'll move on. I wrote, I'm not going to warrant what I'm going to say because I wrote this on a flight this morning at about 1 a.m. So forgive me just a little bit as we move through. But first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. That's the most important. We are on the cusp of doing something great. And we means everyone in this room and in this region that's working this issue. This is absolutely exciting. And I want to recognize my board members that are here that make it possible for us to do great things, meaning collaborate and integrate within our community. And I'm very thankful for that. I mentioned Judge Tall. I introduced him again as part of our board of directors, Judge Executive of Hardin County. Appreciate you, Judge Tall. Also have Judge Cook was supposed to be here, but I'm not seeing him as part of our board. Trish Niles, who's also not just a board member, but also our workforce board chairwoman as well. That's an integral part of what we do. Kendra Stewart, who is a past board chair for LTAD, a long-time member. We appreciate her and all she does. Representative Hevron is going to be able, she'll be introduced here in just a moment, but we appreciate her and all she does. I don't think I missed anyone, did I? Katie, I want to make sure that I didn't. So, next that I want to thank are our funders. So, how did we get here? One of the main missions of LTAD, or the core mission of LTAD, our why, is to do for our elected officials and local governments and almost 300 citizens what they can't do for themselves. As we work with our workforce partners, employers across the 8-county region that we have, and we work with our local governments, one thing has become critical. A, economic development, and as part of that, workforce participation and the pressure that child care costs and lack of capacity has put on that. This has been a critical issue. When we started talking about this issue, our workforce partners, some that I'm going to recognize here in just a moment, made it clear we need help in this. We need someone to fill the leadership void, and we feel like that LTAD can help us do that. They stepped up and funded this to make it happen, and that's incredibly important. I want to recognize those funders. Kirk Chadwick, obviously with Fishbach, selling himself short and him stepping up, not just helping fund that, offering his facility today, eating a lot of costs associated with today's event. We appreciate you, Kirk and Fishbach, for your participation. Then I also have our good friends at Baptist Health, Tom Carrico and Jake Druin. I'm not sure where Jake went. There he is. Appreciate you guys and what you've done in stepping up to provide funding. ECTC, recognize the real president, Megan Stiff of the college, and of course Justin Pate, who we appreciate most days, and them funding. We appreciate them and stepping up. Alltech, Daniel Flory is here with us, the plant manager. Appreciate Daniel, you stepping up. I told you you can be anonymous today. And helping us fund. Andy Gaines with EIF. Thank you, Andy, for helping. Appreciate it. They were actually the final sponsor to come in to make this possible. And Krista Schauss with United Way. Krista, I appreciate this very much. What's most exciting about this And want to particularly point out, you'll hear from her later, and make her a little bit nervous, but Rachel Ritchie, who is a mother that has been impacted by this, we get the opportunity to help them. That's right. I don't want to lose focus of that. And I don't want to take away Brian Nottingham's presentation. But when you look at the numbers, I want you to keep a couple things in mind. 56 to 58% workforce participation rate across the state and in our region. It's abysmal. We need all the help we can get to raise that. We have over 2,000 parents, mainly females, that want to work but can't because of childcare. Think of the impact on them personally and professionally, that they want to get involved in the workforce but can't. We have a chance to help them. That's huge, absolutely huge. We have this large economic development project going on in this county, 5,000 employees, 2,500 per plant. That sucks all the oxygen out of the room because every employer we see in here are having the same struggles, just at a different scale. Their struggles may get a little worse because of that plant. When you look at the numbers that Brian is going to outline, almost 80% of the employment of one of those plants could be solved if we solve this problem. That's huge, absolutely huge. And that's just 8 counties plus Hart County, so a total of 9 counties, our region plus Hart County. That's monstrous. And we have a keen responsibility to do that. We are the only ones in this state at this level of work on this issue. You're part of something special, you're part of something great, and we can achieve this. We are going to change lives, and a rising tide raises all boats. And I appreciate your work, I appreciate you being here, I appreciate you raising your hand and being willing to participate in this. I appreciate it. One last note, as I look out over the crowd, I forgot to introduce Judge Executive Joe Cho from Hart County, who's participating in this and is part of the Brad region. But as you look at employers, they draw a lot of people from Hart County. That's why they're involved. Thank you, Joe. Thank each and every one of you for what you're doing to participate in this. Thank you.
So I laughed. Oh gosh, y'all really want me to laugh today. I laughed. I was texting Daniel last night. I was, of course, last minute, and I was like, "Let me send you my presentation." I was like, "But I have a binder made. Like I've been working on this all weekend. I'm so excited, and I really am excited about this." But to start off, I am Samara Hebron. I'm the 18th District State Representative. I represent all of Grayson County and a portion of Hardin. So Glendale, Sonora, Upton, Stevensburg. I'll put a plug in for Lakers Drive-In if anyone like Lakers. And so I am also in Frankfort. I'm the chair of Families and Children. And so I kind of want to talk about today how I got into this. Now I think I have like an hour and 10 minutes. I'm not going to bore you to death. I did wear black. I'm not going to a funeral. Slimming. I mean, we're all waiting for summer, right? And so anyways, very excited. I am very passionate about this. And, you know, I think that God puts us on different paths. And whenever I got to the legislature, I remember someone asked me, they were like, you need to figure out what you want to do and go with it. Well, I wanted transportation. Sal Santoro, Judge Choate and I were just talking about him. He really took me under his wing. I thought I was going to be the next chairwoman of the road plan. And funny enough, I did not become that. I started getting into all these issues with childcare and children, and I realized that's exactly where I needed to be. So when I got the chair for Families and Children, I knew that's where I needed, and that there were other people who were going to take care of roads and asphalt. That is gold, right? Like, we all love roads. But also making sure that we've got our kids taken care of, and making sure that we're taking care of our foster kids and childcare and all these issues that families and children deal with every day. That's really the most important thing that we can do. And so, okay, yeah. Also, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. It really is an honor. You know, it's really funny. Sometimes in Frankfort, you look at the Courier-Journal, you look at whatever newspaper you read, Facebook, and a lot of these things don't get brought up. And so I'm really proud that I can come talk to you today, the work I've done on child care, because it's not really a sexy topic that gets covered by Joe Sonka, who I do love. But you know, those people, they're not covering these topics because that doesn't really get a lot of readers and viewership. So it's really humbling for me today to be able to come to you all and share, hey, here's what we've been doing from our district. And it really is important who you elect. So how did I get here? When I was elected in 2019, I became the youngest female ever elected to the Kentucky General Assembly. I no longer hold that title, but I am the youngest Republican, so we'll keep that one. But I realized that when I got elected, I looked around the room and I looked a little different than everybody else. Right? I'm not a male. I don't have gray hair yet. And, I remember Jerry Miller, he was from Jefferson County. He looked at me one day and he said, Samara, I have ties older than you. And this was like an everyday occurrence. And if you know me, I'm quippy. And so I look at him, I'm like, Jerry, I have nothing as old as you. And nothing ever was said again about that. And I appreciated that, which, it's love. But, at some point it's like, okay, let me do my job. And they really, everyone came around me and supported me. And when we get to House Bill 499, that is a true example of how everyone came together and rallied behind me. But so I felt like I was there for generational conversations. And, something I noticed is that when we're talking about childcare, everyone has different life experiences. And so this is a different generation of, some of the people that I work with, maybe when they were raising their family, it was 30 years ago, it was 40 years ago. So maybe their wife stayed at home because women were more likely to stay at home. Maybe they had the luxury that they had a grandparent or their parent taking care of their child. And so it's just different life experiences. That's not the way that it is today. It's really, people can't afford one parent to stay home. And if they do, they make it work, and that's fantastic, but that's not for everybody. But also you gotta look at our divorce rates. And we got a lot of single parents. So much like Kirk, I was raised by you were part-time raised by a single mom for 6 months. I was full-time raised by a single mom, and she did a fantastic job, but if it weren't for my grandma, I wouldn't be where I'm at today, because she really helped make sure that if my mom had to work, that she was there to help. And it really just, it matters. And so I also, when I got elected, I wanted to make sure to be a voice for single parents, because that's a big deal. So how I kind of got into childcare, though, is that I remember right after the pandemic, I would go into the Dollar General or Walmart, and people would come up to me and say, people aren't going to work because of a stimulus payment. They're not going to work because of unemployment benefits. They aren't going to work because they're lazy. And I really just got tired of hearing it, because I'm like, there's more to this than just people. I just got tired of it. And I'm like, there have to be more reasons than that of why people are leaving the workforce. And so when I started digging down, I talked to my friend Charles All, who works for the Kentucky State Chamber. He's my other brain on all this, and he's who I go back with. I think in Frankfurt, it's really important to have someone you trust, and that you can go back and forth with on ideas, right, Russ? And so when you have that, you can dream, and you can have tough conversations, and someone can tell you no, and someone can tell you yes. So anyways, I'm talking to Charles, I'm like, we gotta fix this. What are some things? And so we're talking, and so, some of the workforce barriers we know are substance abuse disorder, work population growth, benefits cliff, and public assistance. And that's something I'm gonna touch on a little bit later, but I think that's something we've really got to acknowledge throughout this process. And actually, when I'm looking at the study, I have some notes on, okay, well, what about the benefits cliff on this? And who knows what the benefits cliff is? A few of you, raise your hand high. I mean, back row people, come on, arms up. Okay, so Meg, what's the benefits cliff?
So it is the point at which you're disincentivized to take additional pay or compensation because you're going to lose the value of the other public benefits that you're receiving.
Yes, and so that's a safe, great job, Meg. That's 100% it. And that's, so many people are scared that they're gonna lose. So as frustrated as you might be with people that won't get off benefits, that's our safety net. And where I know that, where I personally believe that you can do better if you're not on government assistance, sometimes that's that's generational. And so how do we help people get there to where they recognize that? And so it's an ongoing conversation, but something I want you to keep in mind. So I looked at the list of barriers, and I was like, childcare, women, this is me, let's help. And so that's how I got there. And I really wanted to be able to help. I ran for office because I wanted young women to realize they had a seat at the table. Men are okay too. I'm not a he-man woman hater. But generally, like when you run for office, women have to be asked, men don't. Men are just born and they're like, I can run for office, I can do this job. And the more I'm around politics, I'm like, you 100% woke up and you're like, I can be a state rep. We all have that, right? We all know those people. Look around the room, because there's one of those people in here probably. So, I decided how we're going to tackle. How do you skin a cat? No one knows how to skin a cat, right? So how do you tackle childcare? No one knows how to tackle childcare. And so when I got into this, I really didn't know. I just wanted to dream big. And so I thought, you know what? We need the employers who need employees to have some skin in the game. So we came up with in 2022, we came up with House Bill 499, which is a public-private partnership. And so here's an example I always use. So let's say Dr. Pate, he's at ECTC. If he wants to put $500 towards child care for his employees, the state will match that dollar for dollar. So that means $1,000 is going into child care. And if they make less than the state median income, which is $65,000. And I've got to point out Lance, because Lance was part of the beginning conversations of this and a big part of, as a child care owner, we need to do something. And I didn't realize I didn't understand the issue as well as I do now, but there's still a lot to learn about stabilization payments and how that really does play a factor, but also just about the child care industry and the child care sector. And so I knew they needed more money. And so I thought, well, if the employer will put in $500 and the state will put in $500, that's $1,000 going to a child care center, which is more than they had before, right? But it's an incentive. I think in my generation, we look at things a little differently. Everyone looks at things a little differently in their generations, right? It doesn't really matter how old you are. But I think that we want a little more flexibility. We talk about paid family leave and being able to spend more time. The more time you can spend with your kids is a good thing as a parent. Now, I say that I'm the proud dog mom of Rosie, golden retriever, light of my life. But I think it's really important that at the beginning stages, if you can stay home, we need that. And so how do we continue that conversation of the nuclear family? I used to be really triggered by that because I'm like, well, I was raised by a single mom with a nuclear family. But the more that you do it, the more you learn. I think it's really important to recognize if you can have a stronger bond with your baby, it really goes farther in the long run. And I'm learning that in foster care right now. Lots of good conversations in regard to that. But anyways, so the program was the first of its kind. It's always really nice to be cutting edge in government, right? Everyone's like, you're gonna suck at this. 3 years later, I'm still hearing that. So I talked to the governor's office of early childhood education, and I was like, this is what we're gonna do, let's get excited. And they're like, no, this is never gonna work. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. Where's that encouragement of trying to do something different? And, so anyways, we pushed it through. I think it had over 60 co-sponsors, bipartisan in the House, which is really unheard of. No one in Frankfurt agrees on everything, right, Russ? And so, anyways, it was a really big deal. Everyone rallied. And I was telling Judge Choate earlier, I was talking to my friend, Representative Sal Santoro. He is no longer in the legislature, but I was on the way this morning. And he always said this was a feel-good bill. And I called and I was like, well, I'm going to present my feel-good bills this morning. And he just kind of got chuckled. But it really isn't a feel-good bill. It's a good bill. And so, as I said, it allows workforce development program that allows employers to partner with the state to help reduce out-of-pocket child care expenses, especially with those in moderate income families who don't qualify for other forms of support. So with low-income families in Kentucky, we have got a lot of support. We've got CCAP, Child Care Assistance Program, but for middle-income families, who I think are the families that are hurting a lot with childcare, they don't have a lot of support. So this really helps them. It just puts another tool in the toolbox for employers to be able to have some meat in the game to get that state match. Anyone have any questions? No? So whenever this passed in 2022, it got $15 million in the budget, which is a huge deal. And I maybe cried a little, cussed a little, and had to go to the Senate and ask for help, but it got through. And it was a really big deal. Now, fast forward to 2024, it started in July 2023 is when the funds started going. And probably about August or September, about $250,000 had been used. Now, what kind of messed up was it was a pilot program. Whenever it passed, we got it through the last day of session, and Senator Chris McDaniel decided it just needed to be a pilot program. It's always the Senate, let me tell you that. It is always the Senate. And so this year in 2024, we actually took out the word pilot and made it a permanent program. And so we really hope that more businesses are going to be able to look at that. Yes.
So on that, we've had people express concerns and difficulties from the employer side of
Yes.
participating.
Yes. So we are working on, that is something we're constantly evolving. So it's actually, currently it's in paper form, and we're gonna move it all online to make that easier for employers. And so we're constantly getting feedback from people, because that's the thing, we've got to change, right? How something starts is not how it's going to end. And so we are making changes to make it more friendly. It's just getting the feedback from the employers. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so that's it. No questions on 499. Has anyone heard of House Bill 499? ECAP? Yay! Okay.
I do have, you had used us kind of as an example,
Uh-huh.
but are public entities eligible for this program?
No,
Okay.
not yet. So it is more for the private because it's government dollars. And so you don't want to match government dollars with government dollars. I just used you because you were my direct line of sight.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry for the
got
confusion.
confused. I was like, I
Wow, thanks, Dr. Haley, to have my back.
But wait a minute. I should have asked the
Noted.
question. I should have just taken that as approval, shouldn't I?
You should have.
I'm
$1 gets buy-in.
Right? Yes.
What are the limits for income and what's the maximum value?
So there are no limits. 25% of the fund specifically has to go to a small business with less than 50, with less than 50 employees. But there is no cap.
But for an employee, there's no income limit. Is that what you're
So to get 100% match from the state government, it's going to be $65,000 or less. If it goes up, it just tapers off. So it would, if you made $75,000, it would be 90%, and so it tapers off.
Samara, I'm sorry, is that individual income, household income?
Individual income.
Only licensed child care facilities approved?
Yes, so they have to be under the Kentucky STARS quality rating system. Yeah, and yes, so we had a lot of reporting requirements too with that to make sure, just because it is government dollars, we want to make sure that we're getting the biggest investment that we can. And I really do look forward. There was a white paper that came out earlier this year, and it was talking about childcare, and it said basically that this program was a failure because only $300,000 had been spent, and in a 6-month period. And I was like, and I called the person, and I was very upset, and I was like, either A, you're on my team, and you're going to be supportive of this, but also it's been 6 months in government time. That's basically like 3 seconds, but like women supporting women, let's think about that. But also, no one else is getting anything passed. So you can either be on my team and be supportive and help me move forward, or you can not. And, I think it's very interesting being in this realm of, it's really easy to say something's a failure. Something's not going right because it's not really taken off yet. But how many times in life are we those people? And so it gave me a different perspective. I was very angry about that. But, I also had the conversation. I was like, this is total bullshit. Let's all move forward on this. So in 2022, after the session, we have interim. Does everyone know how the legislative process works? Raise your hand if you do. If not, I'm happy to give you a one-on-one course. So during the interim, we come up with issues that we think are really important that we want to have conversations on. We have task force meetings, or we have interim joint committee hearings. And so in 2022, we had the Early Childhood Education Task Force. And I want to read the findings, and we're going to quickly go over the recommendations. But so for the findings, childcare deserts exist across the Commonwealth, and there's a demonstrated need to expand childcare services through all types. So that could be in-home, that could be as a business setup, whatever. 2, there are 5 pillars to early childhood education in Kentucky: hands, first steps, Head Start and early Head Start, public pre-kindergarten, and independent childcare providers. 3, in Kentucky, there are roughly 2 open jobs for every individual seeking a job. Number 4, childcare availability in Kentucky affects a person's decision to enter the workforce. Number 5, the Kentucky Child Care Assistance Program is a key tool in early childhood education program funding. Number 6, House Bill 499 from the 2022 regular session created a pilot program for an employee child care assistance partnership to incentivize employers to contribute to the child care cost of employees. And number 7, child care worker shortages lead to a lack of Child care worker shortages lead to a lack of adequate child care in Kentucky. And so the recommendations, So you see these findings, and if you read the study that we're going to go, this really matches that. So this is a conversation that's been going on for 2 years at least, probably longer than that. I'm looking at Lance. But here are what the recommendations were from that. So you've got recommendation number 1, and I'm not going to go over all of it. I'll let you read it. If you want the presentation, we can send it out. But the first one is the importance of employer engagement. Employers have got to be involved and be part of the conversation. And so it really warms my heart to see how we've got Fishbach here, and we've got Baptist Baptist Health Hardin. Yeah, sorry. It'll always be Hardin Memorial to me. It's where I was born. I'm sorry.
It's okay, don't need to apologize.
I'm a boomer. I laugh and say I'm the youngest, but really, I'm a boomer. So employer engagement. Recommendation number 2, it's really talking about CCAT eligibility and making sure that we can look into that. And so some of the really cool things as I look at this from 2022, I forgot it existed until Saturday when I was working on my presentation, and I was like, hey, we've actually followed through with some of this stuff. This is great. The next one is a multi-model delivery approach. And I think that's really important in our ecosystem, is being able, there's a place for pre-K, there's a place for childcare, and there's a place for Head Start. And how do we get all those together to work to make the ecosystem the best it can be for early childhood? The next one is childcare workforce. Lance could probably talk a whole lot about this, and I'm sure he will this afternoon in the task force meeting. But the workforce, we've got to do better. And so that's a recommendation, is working on that. The next one is zoning, and so this is actually House Bill 561 from this past session, so we'll talk about that. And the last recommendation is to talk about tax incentives. And so I think one of the biggest problems that we face, and you will probably see this too on your day-to-day basis, is a lack of communication. So we've all these little divisions and departments in government, but no one talks, and it drives me nuts. Does anyone in the workplace, do you all have lack of communication problems? Yeah, nobody. That's surprising. Wow. Yeah. I mean, honesty. What is it? We're not a confession. I mean, I guess we are a confession. Be honest. So tax incentives and looking at that. So I think that the Department of Early Childhood could do a lot better of talking to child care owners and saying, hey, these are things that we're doing in state government that you could apply for. There's a $100,000 startup grant for you to open up your own child care center. Do people know that? No. There are coaching opportunities. You just opened a business. Who's ever started their own business? It is really hard. There is no guidebook. You ask a lot of questions, you fail, and you figure it out. So if there's a coach there, why would you want to share that? We're paying money to take care of it. So anyways, having conversations and talking about tax incentives. So in the 2023 regular session, there's always time for a cleanup bill. And so being the good chairwoman that I am, I gave the bill to another member, Nick Wilson. Who, bless his heart, he was the one this year that filed a bill that said you could sleep with your cousin, Russ. Yeah, you could sleep with your first cousin. He quickly unfiled it because he messed up. But it was really funny because he did have a cousin come and page 4, and we were like, do not say this is your family. Do not say this is your family. Nick's a great member. I mean, you gotta laugh, right? Like we're all fighting the war together. And so anyways, he has no family. We'll never have any cousins come up. And he won Survivor several years ago, and so he has it worse than any of us because he's got this international fan base who just obliterate him. So anyways, there's Kentucky for you. So you did a great cleanup bill in 2023, and basically required the Cabinet for Health and Family Services to report to the LRC the findings and just continuous updates of ECAP. And then allow child care provider to terminate an active contract created pursuant to the program. So kind of like I was saying, Andy, we're constantly learning and having to revamp. We did that again this session. So 2024, what a long session. So this last session was 60 days, budget session, started on January 2nd. We had leap day. It was the longest session possible that we could have, and it was rough. Russ, are you still recovering?
Way too much.
Yeah. There's not enough alcohol in the world to help you recover from that one. Or smoking. I always threaten I'm going to start smoking during session. I'm like, oh man, I need a cigarette. I've never smoked. But it can be rough. So anyway, House Bill 561. So whenever we're talking about conversations with child care owners, one of the biggest things that comes up is the impediment in local zoning. Everyone is very different. And I don't brag on Louisville a lot, but Louisville did a really great study a few years ago, which is in the study with Lincoln Trail, that they looked at their local zoning ordinances and tried to make it easier for in-home facilities or other facilities to open up for their child care. And so I was like, here's something we can do. Now, the thing we don't want to do is tell local governments what to do, right? But so this bill encourages local governments to look at their local zoning ordinances and policies, land use policies, and make evaluation. So KLC and KCO both agreed on it. It was a much easier conversation than annexation. Looking at the judges in the room. So that was something we could all agree on. And so here's what 561 does. It instructs the Cabinet for Economic Development to work with the area development districts to create and implement the Certified Child Care Community Designation Program. So I had a conversation with Secretary Null right at the beginning of this legislation, and I was like, economic development does really great things. I think when businesses are coming into Kentucky, they should know the incentives that we offer for childcare. They should know what we're doing. Will you all be part of that? And he was like, this is a great idea, we love it, but we don't have the manpower. Totally understandable. Who does in executive government? So we were like, okay, the area development districts, they have the relationships with their local officials, and they can start educating. Because that's the one thing in childcare is that unless you really know it, you don't know it, right? And so this issue might have not been important to you 5 years ago. It might not have been important to you until this morning when Daniel asked you to be here. But it really is important. And so, but when I talk to my city council, my magistrates, love them. They're wonderful, but that's not really something that gets them votes, right? That's not asphalt. That's not a road sign. That's not, I don't know, what else do magistrates do, Judge Tall?
I'd rather not answer that.
Here. So that's not something that they're necessarily thinking about maybe because that doesn't really, they don't realize that it affects them and having the conversations. And so that's why we wanted to get the ads involved. And so, well, I'll finish that in a second. Okay, so it removes the pilot program designation for the Employee Child Care Assistance Partnership. Fantastic, very excited. And then establishes a new requirement for the Cabinet for Economic Development to develop and implement strategies and programs to promote awareness of the Employee Child Care Assistance Program partnership. And so we want them that whenever companies are coming in, that they say, hey, did you realize that we've got this that you could use? And once again, it's just a better form of communication. And so here's my issue with all of this. Very excited. I think it's great. I get a letter the last day of session from Secretary Null, and he says, this is great, but we're going to need $1 million per year to run this program, or we're not going to implement it. And so I'll be real honest, like I'm pretty frustrated about that. I usually really get along with the administration. I'm here not for politics. I'm here to do the right thing. But when it's not reciprocated, that's a problem. And so I really don't know where House Bill 561 is going to go. I don't know if they're going to say they need money. You know, I negotiated on the beginning that they wouldn't have to do anything except check mark that, I didn't even get into this. So if you do all these wonderful things, you become a child care ready community, much like recovery ready community, but it's child care ready community if you look at your local zoning ordinances. And so really all the cabinet has to do is check mark, because they didn't have the capacity to do the work. So I put that on the ads because they have more capacity. Sorry, ads. And so I really don't know where it's going to go. I've not had a conversation. You know, everyone loves snail mail, right? And unless you're a state rep and you want an answer, because I deserve to have a conversation, not a letter via email. So you all can tell how I feel about this. So we'll see where it goes. You know, it's funny. The legislature is supposed to give the rules, and we tell the executive branch what to do. We pass the laws, and they're supposed to execute them. So this is kind of a new thing. If they say they don't have the money, then they're not going to do it. So we'll see. I hope that we can have better conversations about it. But in theory and in the law, this is fantastic because it really encourages those local governments to start looking at their local zoning ordinances and become child care ready. And I think that's really important when we're looking at workforce, because I don't know one person in the judges or the magistrates or any elected official or probably anyone in here that isn't looking for workers. And if that's a barrier, why aren't we helping that? Sorry, I kind of got really, I'd forgotten about that letter, hadn't talked about it. I am not happy though, that is what you should remember. So yes. Okay, so here's something happy. Here is what money went to. So the 2024 regular session budget, child care funding, $60 million annually. So it was really interesting is we've been having these conversations for over a year of what money needs to be there. And so my first budget proposal I got was $300 million. Kentucky Child Care would fail if we did not have $300 million. And, it's kind of a lot to figure out. And then it went down to $200 million, and it went down to $120 million. So this is the number we came up with. Here's the issue, is there's a lot of inconsistency within the child care communities with what they need. And so the federal government gave over $400 million in stabilization payments to the state of Kentucky. 400 million, Lance, Russ? I think it was over 400 million. And so it was used for different things, but so a stabilization payment is much as like what you're assuming right now. They sent money to help stabilize the child care industry, but there was a hard stop. And so I think the last payment was in December. Yeah, December of this year. And so child care, they were able to increase their wages because of this, and which is great. But now that it's gone, what do they do? And so it's kind of been an overarching conversation, and we'll get into more of that in a few minutes. But here's what we did get. House Bill 6 included $60 million each year to support quality child care and workforce development. They include maintaining high reimbursements for child care providers serving low-income families. Continue allowing child care teachers to receive free child care, which is critical for supporting the child care workforce. This is something that states look at us on. We started this, and then now I think 30 other states have followed. And so really, in Kentucky, we are a leader in child care because of these innovative conversations and programs. It continues the Employee Child Care Assistance Partnership, helps low-income families receiving child care subsidies to overcome the benefits cliff, early childhood development scholarships, and new innovations in early childhood support initiatives like on-site employer-based child care. Now, while we have a lot more work to do in future conversations, I think this is a really good start, and it helps us sustain the child care industry for another budget cycle to have those conversations. Okay, now for the fun part. Policy questions moving forward. Child care versus early childhood education. Which one are we talking about? Because I think they're two very different things. So my counterpart in the Senate, who's the chair of the Senate Families and Children, he thinks we all need to move towards early education. But I think it's different than child care. I think that there can be a mix, but they're different. And so that's a conversation we're gonna have to answer moving forward in Frankfurt, is which one is it? The next one is, what is the government's role in child care? So with the stabilization payments, I was the mean mom this session, and I said, I don't think we need to give stabilization payments. How can we pick one industry to give pay raises to or to help sustain whenever we've got nurses that need more money? I mean, what industry doesn't need more money? What industry wouldn't want government to say, I think you need higher wages, here's some extra money to help that? That never ends. And so we didn't do stabilization payments this year, but we did try to help in other ways. And so the $120 million over the next 2 years going into the child care industry will make a difference. Now, I'm gonna say Lance does not agree with me on this. 100% okay. I'm very humble. I had to call the post office. I thought they lost my package. They did not. I found the key in my purse, and I had to call and apologize. So I had humble pie this weekend, and I'm here for it. But I do think it's a conversation we've got to have. It's uncomfortable and it's awkward, but we've got to have it or it's not ever going to change. Yes?
Why do you think that wages are so low? Like in our industry, they're expanding every day.
Yeah.
We're looking for people, why are they so low in the child care?
That's a good question, Kirk, and I'm trying to figure it out. Because, if you're paying $6,000 to $9,000 annually for a child, but it whittles down to being only able to pay your employees $10 an hour or minimum wage, like what's the gap? And I actually wrote a really good article about Bright Horizons and how they started there. I think they do Toyota, their on-site childcare. And it talked about how childcare industries are kind of ran like commodities, and you've got to change that model of it. And so, we've talked about budgets. I've said, let me see, is it buying power? In the article, it was like, it's not buying power, which I thought was interesting, because I'm like, how can we help if they're, but I'm going to get to that too, of kind of like what we're going to try to talk about in the General Assembly. So what's the government's role in childcare? A lot of people were really upset about House Bill 499. Everyone co-sponsored it, but then they were like, oh my God, the government's helping pay for childcare. I'm like, yeah, but you're bitching that there are no workers. So, it's kind of it's a catch-20. Is that what it is? Catch-20? Catch-22, whatever. And so, yes, I'm too young. Okay, so talking about that, I think it's a broken business model. It's not working, and the market's not going to correct it. So how do we help childcare industries be able to fix that? Okay, next, what exactly does the childcare industry need? I kind of touched on that. I had someone say they needed $300 million. I had someone say they needed $100 million. You've got to be consistent. And I think most of you all know that with the legislature is unless everyone can come up with a consistent message, we're not going to do it. And so the funding that the budget we put out for the House originally, it was what the governor's office suggested. But when the information isn't always clear, so there was a report that came out saying how much like CCAP costs for the cabinet and things like that, and those numbers weren't correct. And we were trying to figure it out. And even the secretary was like, these might be a little off. So trying to figure that out. Information is hard. Why is information hard? And then childcare versus universal pre-K, the biggest elephant in the room. And I tell you, Lance really helped me on this to understand it. So universal pre-K, great in theory, right? You've got different people pushing it. If you take the 3 and 4-year-olds out of childcare centers, you take away the moneymaker for childcare centers. So they're already struggling with money, so let's take their 3 and 4-year-olds. Then they can't have childcare because babies cost a lot more, but you can have less because of ratios. And so I remember I was speaking at a Lincoln Trail thing, and a woman came up to me about preschool, and she's like, why do you hate universal preschool, blah, blah, like just roasting me. And I'm sitting there like, oh, I'm kind, be nice. And Lance came up, he's like, well, do you want our child care centers to go bankrupt? He maybe didn't say that exactly, but basically. And I think that was something that was really important for you to hear, is that you can't just say universal pre-K is going to fix everything, because then it hurts the child care ecosystem. And so that's when I say that when there's a multi-model delivery approach, we can have that conversation, and there's room for everybody at the table, but we can't just eliminate one thing or add one thing and think it fixes the problem, because it doesn't. So dream policies for 2025. We've got on-site child care centers at industrial parks. In 2022, that was my dream, is I want to go to the E-Town Industrial Park, EIF. I want to go there and be able to see a child care facility that the liability is not on the factories or the manufacturing, but it's in its own place. And so there are people that will come in and run the child care centers, and then the companies put the money into it, right, to run it and make sure, much like Toyota, they have 24-hour child care, and there's a group that comes in and they take care of that for them. That's my dream. Removing school district barriers for child care. I've got a lot, so E-Town, I know, has reached out to me, Ohio County, Hardin County Schools already has it, but being able to open up child care facilities in schools for their teachers, what a great incentive. Being able to, because here's the thing, whenever you have a child care facility close by, that changes the game. You no longer have a commute, because, you've got your commute from home, but it's not that added time for the child, for dropping off child care and then going. It allows maybe the mom or dad to go eat lunch with the child. If they've got a small break, they can pop over there and say hello. It's all types of things. There's all types of benefits to on-site child care. And so I think it's the same with allowing them at schools. STARS program evaluation. So in Kentucky, we have a rating system called STARS, and it's about quality. But what I'm afraid it is it's about money. And so if you can afford to pay more, you can have 5-star quality. And I want us to reevaluate that. It's been for 10 years. I talked to the original sponsor, David Gibbons, about it, and he was like, absolutely, go in and look at it. So I think that's a really important conversation because everyone complains about our regulations, which are pretty strenuous, but they do come from the feds. But having that conversation, I think, is really important. What fit 10 years ago probably doesn't fit today. I wasn't even born then. Entrepreneurial moms. I think we're really missing out on a great portion. That poor Dr. Pate, I think I've told him several years this. But I think it's really, so we've got moms that stay at home, they leave the workforce, stay at home with their kids, and that's really hard to get back in the workforce, right? What about if they stay home and taking care of their kids, they can take care of other kids? Why don't we have like an entrepreneurial certificate for moms to be able to go back into the workforce and help? And so can KCTCS offer a certificate? Moms for Hire? No, but I think it's really important because I think that encourages, if you've been out of the workforce for 5 or 10 years, it's really hard to get back in because everything's changed. So what if we can offer ways for them to say, hey, you've got a really great skill set, and then take it from there. Ratios. Ew. Looking at Lance. Yeah, our ratios are nuts. And no one wants to change them because it would hurt our childcare system. So I think it's a conversation we've got to continue to have. It's one of those like tough, rip the Band-Aid conversations. I don't know what's right though. Some mayors are open. And then after school programs. Having that conversation of what that looks like because after school programs are just as important as other childcare too. So what can you do? I know you're at the edge of your seat wondering, and I'm actually not picking up all my time. I'm doing great. Okay, so what can you do? Listen. Listen to people. If you are a CEO or you are HR, listen to what your people need. Don't assume. I think that's something that we really miss. That's something I try to do in government is to listen. I saw a thing the other day and it says we listen to respond, we don't listen to listen. And I think it's important for us to listen and hear because what you expect an issue to be probably isn't it because that's your life experience, not someone else's. Next is to educate. Educate that this is an issue. Have the conversations. You don't know it's an issue until you're affected by it. Most likely. That's life, right? You don't know something's an issue until it comes to you. So educate those around you about this. Have the conversations. And then have hard conversations. That's how change is done. We can't be complacent. We've got to keep moving forward. And so have the hard conversations to make it better. And I will leave this up. This is my email address and my personal cell phone number. What questions do you all have? I worked that hard on this presentation for no questions. I mean, Kirk, I could have should have brought stickers. Go on.
As I was thinking about this, oftentimes, it's a totally different topic, but oftentimes I think to myself, why in the world am I making healthcare decisions for these people who work? And 100 years ago, that's how the government and industry decided they were going to do it. The GM and the giant companies then said, we will take on the burden of healthcare, because the government couldn't afford it. Right? Yeah. And it seems to me that that same discussion is, in a capitalistic society, that has to happen in some way. The first thing you have is on-site healthcare. We talked about Toyota. That's a great model, but it has to, we're nibbling at the edges of it here with government. Yeah. And we have to think about how industry that needs workers is going to partner with the government to say, what share are we going to hold? And that's not just a push, but I can't make that decision. That's a broad decision. So it's not really a question, just a thought process of how does that discussion continue to happen. So
That's a great comment. And it's true. And when I started House Bill 499, that was part of the conversation. I brought in a bunch of stakeholders that were chamber board members with the state, and we talked about that. And really, we need more voices. We need to hear from you all about it. We need to hear from employers of what you all think have the conversation, because right now it's just complacent. And so so I appreciate that. And I know you're going to be part of that good change.
Did you explain the zoning thing on where do you have any idea where counties and cities fall into that, or?
Yes.
I wasn't quite clear what you meant by that.
Yes, so, the cabinet would work with stakeholders. Okay, so the cabinet's gonna work with, I'm gonna kind of go back over it again through my notes. So the cabinet's gonna work with a third party to get a study on what's needed for making the best land use policy or zoning changes for counties and cities. So they'll work to get that.
So we don't know where we stand right now because the study hasn't happened yet.
Yes, yeah, but there are things that you all can do to look. And so recommendations and best practices would address topics like proper definition for key terms, where child care services should be allowed by right with conditional use permits or special standards and specialized guidance for establishing employer-based child care industrial areas. So one thing is, so your licenses, you know, are your licenses affordable for people, for counties or cities? You know, are they $100? Are they $250? Are they $500? Does that help encourage people starting their own businesses? For zoning, you know, is it for the residential? You know, can you have in a neighborhood, and let's not talk about recovery houses, that's a whole different, but you know, for zoning, you know, can you have it in a specific area? Is the area zoned correctly, or does it make it too hard to start one? Can they afford to change the zoning? And I don't know if it costs money to change zoning, but you know, do they have the knowledge to be able to do that? So kind of like that, I think. Does that kind of...
Yeah, it helps.
Yeah, and I think KLC and KCO will provide information for you all and have conversations about it, but it also kind of depends on economic development and what they decide. Do you have a question? Oh, sorry, I thought you raised your hand. I'm an eager beaver over here. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. So my husband and I live in Bowling Green, and we were very enthusiastic and optimistic about the child care program to help with the cost of child care. My husband works for an employer in Bowling Green. We took them to that HR manager, laughed at my husband and said that wasn't going to be possible because it wasn't fair to other employers or employees that did not have children in child care. So what would you say to for the employers here to act as advocates for other employers that do not believe that is necessary or fair to their employees?
Yeah. Isn't that life? Like, well, I shouldn't get it. You know, you shouldn't get it because no one else can have, you know, whatever. You know, have conversations. If you're part of SHRM, I think the State Human Resources Management, have conversations there. You know, talk about it. Representative Bratcher, Senator Deneen, and I went and spoke the other day at one of their meetings here in Elizabethtown, and we talked about it. You know, and so I think that if people like that, their HR people can go and share the positivities. Sicilian Bank, I believe, uses ECAP, and so they were talking about how great it was for their employees. You know, I think it's having the conversations, being able to talk to other people, but also it's really hard. I'm going to say, you know, everyone's competition. And so do you want to share what you're, as a business, like, do you want to share what you're doing to get employees? You know, I work with Trish with Mid-Part, and on, you know, we'll post on social media about job hirings, and, you know, but are we going to sit there and say, you know, there's some stuff we don't put on social media because we don't want our competitors to know. You know, it's a hard place, and I wish, you know, maybe someone in the room that is a CEO could speak on that. But I see both sides. Don't want to see both sides, no. But I think that part of it is talking about the goodness. And, you know, when you are hiring, and that could be your ad districts too. Like, you know what, like, things have got to change. This is no longer a market that you, as an employer, you've got to market and say, I'm the best person. Because employees can go anywhere right now. And I think employers are seeing that with the amount of job openings too.
I want to jump in just real quick,
Absolutely.
Mayor, if you don't mind. Casey, that's a great question and a great point. And I think the great thing about this group is we have everyone that matters in that conversation inside the room. College, chamber, industrial authorities, all represented on the task force in the room, having discussions, the ad district, interfacing the local officials as well as the workforce board, and many others. And obviously our elected officials that can't go unnoticed in this. All of them communicating and putting that information out. And I think that's one of the great things, hopefully, that comes out of this task force and all the work, is that we can all take that back and great time to highlight that, take all this information back and say, hey, here's what you need to be thinking. Here's what's out there. Here's why you should take advantage of this. This is why we should keep moving forward, because it has an economic impact. And so I'll note to everyone, when Brian does his, what Samara has done, as you can see, the #1 advocate in this state on this issue. She does a great job in many facets, but this is one that she has absolutely spearheaded, and we've got some great momentum going. And one tool that she has reminded me often that we need something in black and white that highlights the return on investment, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what we all have to know. And so now we're going to have that. When you see Brian's presentation, you're going to see return on investment. That gets everyone's attention when you see that. Numbers guys like Kurt, Andy, those represented in the room, Tom, you're going to take that back and say, this has an impact. This completely changes the mindset. We have to make sure we communicate that.
Thank you all. I'm here all day if you have questions.
You require me to use that microphone.
And just so everybody knows, there's donuts. Yeah, I think you know that already. There's beverage back there, and there's a bathroom just to the left. So if that's occupied, there's one downstairs. No, I think people just go in there. All right. Thank you. I just want to make sure. All right.
Okay, so I'm going to forego the microphone. Can everybody hear me? I figured. I spent a decade in academia. I can't project. So I'm going to skip the microphone because I move around a lot and I talk everything too. I use my hands. So it's really wonderful to be here today. My name is Brian Nottingham. I'm from TPMA. We're a consulting firm based in Indiana. And we were really, really thrilled to get the opportunity to work on this really important issue for Lincoln Trail. This is something that really has been at the forefront of the work we do for, I don't know, Jonathan, would you say 1.5 years, 2 years? We started down this road. And the communities really across the country are all facing these same problems. We come to these conversations over and over and over again. And I really thought the state representative did a great job hitting on a couple of the key points right off the bat. And maybe this will be a little bit helpful. I'll share something that we heard when we testified in front of the Indiana legislature last summer about infrastructure. So your roads committee, you didn't seem to get it, and now you've got this more important task at hand here. But really a good way to think about child care is it is infrastructure. It's required to do business. Much like if you're going to bring a new employer in, you're going to create these new jobs, you got to upgrade whatever, the water lines, the utilities, the highways, the access points. Child care should really be thought of in the same way. It's something that is really required for the economy to function at a high level. Every other segment of an industry, every other industry segment of an economy relies in some capacity on child care for their workforce. So I think it's really, really important to think about it that way and kind of keep moving forward with that idea that this is not something that we can really avoid anymore. So I do want to take 1 second, want to acknowledge, of course, Daniel ran through all of them, but I just want to say that this was one of the most engaged groups that I ever worked with in terms of funders. A lot of times they're happy to write the checks and then we just go from there. But we had, 2 or 3 sessions where we reviewed the study. They had great comments, wonderful feedback, insightful. In fact, Kirk kind of took me back by some of his comments, but ended up making the model better, which is everything we always want to do. We want to make it more accurate, more realistic, and to sort of, kind of guide the way. So I just, from the researcher's perspective, I really want to thank everybody that was involved in those conversations. It meant a lot, and I think it made a much better product there in the end. And then the other thing, I'm going to do a lot of the talking today, but I would be remiss to not acknowledge Jonathan Ferris and Casey Bunch in the back, my fantastic colleagues that really made all this possible. And without them, I'll be up here talking because I can talk, but without them, none of this really happens either. So I want to make sure that we acknowledge all the good work they put in as well. So, all right, we've got several things here, and there's a bunch of numbers. I will say that it's a little overwhelming, so we don't need to get into a lot of it. But really, I want to draw your attention to this chart right here, this graph. So looking at this really packs a lot of information in looking forward at what the needs of the community are going to be looking out to the year 2033. So we've got data from several sources here. The blue bar, that's the children, or the population of children aged 5 and under, okay, that might require child care. And this is for the Lincoln Trail region, plus Hart County added in as well. So this is all aggregated together. The blue bar represents the number of children. The orange bar represents the number that are in need of child care. Now this number nationally sits at between 80, 85% typically. There's always going to be a percentage of parents that just don't require child care. They're going to have grandma going to do it, or perhaps mom and dad are going to work opposite shifts, take care of their child care that way. So it's never going to be 100% one-to-one where every child in a region requires a slot, but typically it is about 80, 85%. Now, that's not capacity, that's in need of child care, where if they had access to affordable child care, they would take advantage of it. So again, looking forward, our population projections out through 2033, blue bar population, orange bar, the percentage of that population that's going to require child care in the region. Now we look at the lines, and we've got 4 lines there. I know it gets a little bit busy, but the bottom line, it's the solid dots that stays level. That's the current capacity, based on information from KY Stats and other really great sources that were made available to us through the course of this study. So you can see at that intersection right now, you're still short. That portion of the orange bar above the line, those are people that need child care that just don't have, they couldn't access it if they wanted to. The capacity is just not there. So if we maintain that level moving forward, the problem gets worse by 2033. The distance between the top of the orange bar and the dotted line at the bottom increases slightly. The scale is tough to see, but again, in the report, you've got all the gory details, all the numbers, everything you could really dig into. So I will apologize. It is smart that you didn't have me go first. A lot of numbers, putting people to sleep on a Monday morning. So it's really good that I went a little bit later. But believe it or not, I'm sparing you a lot of it. You can dig into all the details in the report. But nonetheless, as you can see, we've got this problem that's going to continue to go up. And the one thing I would point out too, and this is really great feedback from the committee that I worked with, these numbers were adjusted to account for the future employment and folks moving in as part of the Blue Oval Park. So that was great feedback and something we did to make the model more robust and make sure we're fully accounting for that influx of additional parent workers. So the additional bars just sort of model what percentage increase would be necessary to reach this point of equilibrium. That is, where every parent that requires some sort of child care or would want some sort of full-time child care has access to it. Equilibrium point, where the capacity exceeds or meets the total demand. So to reach that point, we estimated in 3 different ways. The first line is a 1% increase in seats year over year. The second line, the green one, is a 2% increase. And the purple line is a 3% increase year over year. So if you want to reach this point of equilibrium by 2033, you need to increase the number of child care seats in the region by about 3% year over year. And you can see the numbers, what this will lead to. So 339 the first year, 417 in 2025, onward and upward from there. So by the time you get to 2033, you've produced an additional 528 seats. Those aren't small numbers, which is why it's so important that we've got this task force up and running, and we're talking about solutions and next steps and how to tackle this. I don't know that the anecdote is eloquent, but again, how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. We got to get started on this, and there's lots of solutions, lots of approaches, and how do we get to that place. But we wanted to model that out to sort of set the stage, to see where you are, where you need to go to, and how we're going to reach that place. So the other stuff reported out was just the dollars and cents based on the current market rates, or market rate studies from, I think they were done in 13, 15, 18, maybe 2020, maybe 19. We had to do some modeling, but they do the market rate studies periodically, which is another great resource we tapped into. And again, just wanted to set the stage there. But the real impetus, the real point of our study was to identify what we've dubbed work-willing parents. So these are parents, quite simply, that aren't in the workforce, but want to be. And the only barrier stopping them from rejoining the workforce is access to child care. Now you'll see when we show the models, this could come in a couple different ways. There's a group of parents perhaps that are, that are staying out of the workforce that might be on the upper end of the income scale. people with graduate degrees, professional, whatever, high in demand jobs, they're going to make a lot of money, but they can't find quality childcare, at least the quality up to their standards, to place their children in. So they're opting to stay out of the workforce for lack of quality childcare. At the other end of the spectrum, there's a whole bucket of people, and of course we broke out through the study, single parents, both single mothers and single fathers, but there's a whole other bucket of individuals that can't afford childcare of any quality. So these two groups of people are both staying out of the workforce, one because of perhaps quality or even access issues where they're on a wait list for years, they can't get moved to the top, and there's just not the capacity there. And then on the other side, while they might be impacted by capacity, they also have trouble affording it. So it's something to keep in mind. And all of this ties in, of course, to we start talking about the benefits cliff and single parents and how all of that can sort of impact these decisions to rejoin the workforce. Now, as we know, and again, we've got lots of employers in the room, it's been talked about it quite a bit. Coming out of COVID, we've entered, I don't know, it's almost a phase of perpetual employment shortages. So I don't know, bigger term, and this is what we do. We do a lot of economic and workforce development research, but it's kind of a flip answer, but really automation, immigration, and recession are the big ones. We don't want recession. Immigration is a touchy subject, and automation is not something we want to encourage or push forward any faster than we have to in a lot of these situations, at least until the workforce is trained up for other jobs. So to sort of address some of those problems, identifying who these work-willing parents are in the community, how many of them are there, and what would the economic impact be of returning these folks into the labor force, and sort of head off some of these things. So again, we've got the definition all laid out there. No open seats, providers, inability to afford. These are work-willing parents. These are folks that want to go back to work, and the child care access is the only thing stopping them from getting there. Any questions at this point? I know we've got time. We've got a panel at the end. Please interrupt me at any time if you have questions. I just kind of wing it anyhow, so you won't mess with my phone. All right, very good. So when we go through the work-willing parents, the process really, and it's very data heavy, there's really a couple ways we can get after this in a community. Of course, everybody will be familiar with the survey. Well, we'll show up and we'll survey, and we're going to talk to all these people. We're going to figure all of this out. Surveys are extremely expensive and time-consuming and difficult. So really, it's not economical for every community to pull it together. So what we've come up with is sort of a more deductive approach, where we've got a lot of really impressive sort of national level studies that estimate the percentage of these work-willing parents nationwide. We're able to update those and apply those at the local level and model those out. And we're able to come up with a pretty solid and defensible estimate of the number of work-willing parents in a community. Now, the other thing I do want to point out is that we're very conservative at every step of the way. That is, if there is an opportunity to sort of overestimate the impact, we kind of take the other route. We want to make sure that when we provide you with some numbers, and there's some eye-popping numbers at the end, you start thinking about what's affiliated with 2,000 plus parents coming into the workforce, just know that those are compressed, those are shifted down. We do that in several ways, but that's an intentional decision. We don't want to overpromise or overestimate what the potential impact could be. So I just want to make sure we're real good at being clear on that. So we do collect the data. We've talked through some of it. We have to translate these counts of children into household composition estimates. Again, this matters because we're really talking about returning parents to the workforce at this point. It's not so much about the children, but what are the parents attached to them that could go back and get a job. And this is perhaps geeky level detail that you really don't care too much about, but we have to think about things like single parent households. We have to think about things like families that have multiple children under the age of 6. So obviously if you've got a couple, 3 kids that require child care, you're only going to put 1 parent back into the workplace, not 3. So we want to make sure we constrain that and we're not over-counting the number of parents that will be returned to the workforce. So we take a real close look at the census data, American Community Survey data for the region that breaks out the households by family composition and also break it out by young children. So we're very rigorous and want to make sure that that's good, those numbers are correct. We've done that. After that, of course, I've mentioned already, we identify and review reputable national studies. We started with something from the President's Council of Economic Advisors that was released in 2017. which is pre-COVID, of course, or 2019, I'm sorry, 2019, so just before COVID. COVID changed a lot, so we had to take that original model, tie it back to labor force participation trends amongst young parents, and sort of watch those rates go up and down in the years since COVID, and we're able to adjust our estimates by pegging it back to that. Again, all of the details are in the report if you got a chance to look it through. You can ask questions now, and if you need a chance to digest, which I imagine probably some of you will, my goodness, reach back out to us. I'm happy to answer any questions and dig into details. Yes, ma'am?
Well, if I ask other questions, so I apologize.
That's great. I love it. Good.
So I was looking at when it's talking about age ranges.
Yes.
It says 34. I think it's like 18 to 34 for having kids.
Right.
How did you get 34?
Yeah, so that section specifically was to estimate the number of parents that would come out of the Blue Oval Project. So we constrained that. We looked at the industry, that industry. We looked at what their workforce was made up of in terms of age range, and then we used that as a percentage to kind of estimate how many parents would be joining. 18 to 34 was just a cutoff that we talked about with the committee that we thought was reasonable and defensible. Certainly we could run that number out and say 45. My goodness, I don't know, sometimes my fiance wants me to be a dad at 48, so you keep going and going and going. But regardless, we stopped there as sort of a defensible point. And again, getting back to this sort of more conservative estimate, we don't want anybody to come back and say, well, you're saying that parents are going to be parents up to 55, like you've inflated these numbers. So we know we left some out, but we erred on the side of compressing that number. Okay, so,
Thank you.
You bet. You bet. Great question. Okay, great. So we've updated those methods past COVID to kind of look at contemporary changes. And then we're going to apply these models, again, the deductive approach, which makes it economical and sort of capable of being accomplished. We're able to apply these numbers, apply these trends to essentially the households within the region. Now, here's our breakdown, and you can see, again, kind of just walking them through. These are the models that we came up with, and I think it's easier to start here and talk about all the models, and then we're going to fast forward to the latest one, which we use for the economic impact of what's happening right now. So, based on the Council of Economic Advisors study in 2019, the pre-COVID model, they estimate that 13.6% of all parents of children under the age of 6 are outside of the workforce because they can't access childcare. Great. Very valid, reviewed nationally, a lot of conversation about it. That was really, I think, going to be a push, and then COVID came and kind of changed everything. But clearly this shortage of workers is not a new thing. COVID accelerated it, but it was there pre-COVID. It's just had a lot of light shine on it since. So starting with that, and again, these are the numbers for the Lincoln Trail region plus Hart County added in. We figured out, here's the total numbers based on married, cohabitating, male parent with no partner present, female parent, no partner present, and that's just the total. So there's about 15,712 households. About, it's a very precise number, right? But you get what I'm saying. About 15,712 households in the region with children 5 or under 5. So applying this model in 2019 that assumed that 13.6% of these parents were work willing but not working, we applied that percentage to the local numbers, and here was the number in 2019. We estimated there were about 2,137 parents in the region that could return to the workforce if they had access to affordable childcare. COVID, things got worse, clearly. We had social distancing, we had sites getting shut down, we had all kinds of craziness happening, and that number spiked. At that point, of course, you hit on some of it earlier, talking about the employment benefits. Actually, at that time, I worked for the South Carolina Department of Employment Workforce, and that was a never-ending thing. Never, ever ending. So spent a lot of time talking to the media about that during my time there, and I'm much happier to be here talking about this with you. But here we are. During the COVID, the peak impact, we estimated that number jumped up to 18.79%. So we're almost at 19% of all parents, children, under the age of 6, 5 or under, that can't work because they can't access childcare. Things did get better, and again, in 2021, we see this number dropping to 16.59%. So the number of parents impacted in your region went from 2952 in 2020 down to 2607 in 2021. Excuse me. The number continued to improve in 2022, which is the last full year we have data for, so that's where we had to stop. We talked about the speed of government earlier, and it's the same thing with the feds. We rely on the feds to get this information, which relies on information from the state. So, you add double bureaucracy into that, and it takes much longer. So 2023 data should be out soon, but as of right now, 2022 is the latest data that we have. And why that's important is because we pegged this to the employment to population ratio of parents of young children. So by triangulating and tying it back to a standard Bureau of Labor Statistics measure, we're able to update and estimate this percentage, which was pegged at 13.6 in 2019. Things have been better. Labor force participation is better than what it was. We estimate right now there's 2,035 of these folks in the region that would return to the workforce if they had access to affordable child care.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
So, what was running through my mind is, I have a daughter-in-law we have a granddaughter, and she's working remote, which she didn't think about so much before COVID. So even though the number is almost the same with the model, I imagine there's been some industry shifts of where people are working.
That's correct.
So where, like in here, we make things, so you have
Right,
to be
you
here.
have to be here, right.
And so even though the number is almost the same, it's industries are affected.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And you can see sort of some of the perpetual labor shortages, and this would take me a little bit far afield, but we start talking about the pressures of economics and supply and demand. Your employers, you get it. There's more openings than there are people to fill them. Wages go up, salaries go up, benefits go up. The ability to work remotely is offered in situations like you said, you make things, you can't do that here. But lots of industries, if that's a possibility, that's been sort of a patchwork solution in some cases to some of these child care challenges. So folks might not require child care, but they might have, and I know we've got colleagues, so I work with the TPMA, that have their children at home with them. And I mean, my goodness, bless them to be able to do all that, but they've got young children running around and trying to work. So this number, again, is a little bit lower, but that's great insight, Kirk. It certainly is deflated by some things like that. People are sort of solving the problem on their own. And it's really not a solution. They're just burning themselves out. Great. All right, so walking through all those numbers, we distributed those, and I want to talk, and again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here. That's what the report is for, just sort of a high-level overview. But once we accounted for who these people were, these 2,035 folks, we wanted to simulate what it would be to return them to the workforce. Okay, if we put these 2,035 people back to work in this region, what are they going to earn? What industries are they going to be in? What impact is that going to have on income taxes for the state? What impact will that have on gross regional product for the employers? So there was two ways to look at it. We modeled this really in two different ways. The first one, which is represented by this blue, which is hidden behind the yellow, but you can see it spiked here. The blue portion of the graph is if we distribute these parents in a way that exactly mirrors current employment distribution in the region. So we take the industries that already exist here, we look at the number of people that are working in those industries, we look at the industry's median employment or the median wage, and we mirror that. So if 100 out of 1,000 total people, let's keep the numbers easy, for example, say there's 1,000 people working, and 100 of them are working in the manufacturing sector, that's 10%. So we're going to assume that these 2,035 people returning to the workforce, they're going to mirror that. 10% of them are going to go work in manufacturing. So that's how we modeled it to begin with. That's why we call it the mirror model. It's a reflection of the current distribution of the workforce. Assign people across these industries, and the way it's already distributed, and then we figure out what those wages are. The median wages, again, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is our friend in this situation, able to share that information with us. And we see essentially the distribution by income level. So the blue section is if we mirror the current industry employment, these would be the wages. Essentially the number of parents, you can see up this scale is the number of parents, totaling to 235 all the way across, 2,035. The number of parents and what they would earn by income distribution. You see this drop here, and it does sort of skew this way a little bit heavily. So that raised a little bit of concern, and I thought it was really great feedback from the committee. Like, okay, this is really skewing to the left, or to the right. Perhaps perhaps it wouldn't be such a serious problem if folks are going to make $61,000, $71,000, $81,000. It's a little bit easier to afford childcare in those situations. So there is some chance, again, that we would be overestimating the economic impact of returning these people into the workforce. And in fact, the reality is probably a distribution a little bit closer to the left side. And this skews heavily towards folks that are having problems affording childcare. So in this second model, the yellow section, you can see they're congregated in the lower end of the income spectrum. We were able to assign these folks into lower wage jobs, lower median income industries, and use that as an estimate as well. So again, we've got two models. One that mirrors the already existing distribution, assumes that we're going to return people at just the same rate where they're working already. The other one assumes that actually it's a bigger issue with cost, so these folks are going to end up working in lower income industries. So that's the yellow side versus the blue side. I thought it was useful. We left them both in as comparison. But again, the yellow one is going to, again, depress or compress this impact, right? And make sure that it's a more conservative estimate on what the dollars and cents would be. So here's the findings, and this is stepping on each other. I apologize for that. I made these a little bit bigger, and I missed what was going on here. But again, the blue model assumes, again, it mirrors the industry distribution. The yellow model is forcing these parents into sort of lower income positions. And we break it out. We're able to sort of extend that out based on their wages, based on the flat tax rate, or based on the tax brackets, and based at tax levels at the state, at the localities as well. We're able to really draw all this out and estimate how much money is being left on the table. Let's focus on the downward adjusted, the lower income model first. Really the best way to think about it is a range, sort of a band on either side, and the true number is probably somewhere in the middle. But we'll focus on the lower one. If we return these 2,035 work-willing parents, we're going to skew them towards lower average wages. Multiplying all that out, in a year, these 2,000 people would make $99.2 million in collective wages. Okay? It's a big number, 2,000 people though. Start doing that math. So if you do that, that's $99.2 million a year in earnings. This does not consider things like the benefit cliff, which I think is an important extension, and perhaps the next step of this, we start really getting into nitty-gritty and how we're going to sort of tackle the problem. But nonetheless, $99.2 million is a big number. The income tax from the state off of that is $4.5 million. Localities are going to get about $863,000. So $4.5 million out of that $99.2 million, again, goes back into the state coffers in the terms of just personal income tax. Now, this does not include the tax on sales, import, property tax that be made by the employers, right? We already know what those numbers are as well, affiliated with gross regional product, import of goods, property taxes, building, all of that fun stuff that goes into operating a business. That, of course, is driven by the employees as well. But if we take a ratio and look at the number of employees and look at the total gross regional product for an industry in a region for a year, just a simple ratio. In this situation, ratios are our friend. We just take a ratio and divide those and say, here's a pretty defensible, down and dirty estimate of the amount of GRP generated by one employee in a given industry. And as you might imagine, that number goes up and down. It varies quite a bit from industry to industry. Some industries will crank out a lot of GRP for one employee. Others, some of the service industries, might not be so high. So regardless, when we crank these folks back into the workforce, this generates an additional $164.5 million in gross regional product. That's a big number. And there's taxes, of course, that come off of that as well. $14.6 million affiliated with a lot of that as well. So again, these are big numbers, and it's only off of 2,035 parents, right? And I would encourage you all to kind of dig into the details. Hit me up with any questions if you love. I can probably tell I'm talking about these numbers, data, all that fun stuff. And I'm happy to continue digging into it, but this was really an exciting project and something we were very grateful to be a part of. And like I said, the numbers sort of speak for themselves. And now the next steps as we move forward, of course, we've got a task force that's convening. How can we start tackling some of this information? Talked about childcare deserts. There's actually been some work done in other regions where we start mapping those, some sort of GIS thing, and be very specific and detailed about where they end up at. The industrial park idea is an amazing one. I think that's fantastic. And I think that some of the childcare providers would be much more, qualified to talk about this than I would, but there could also be some economy of scale for small child care providers, work together, common payroll, common HR, whatever, some sort of back behind the scenes stuff, anything to sort of streamline the process and encourage some entrepreneurism across this industry as well, because it really is, it's a tough industry. I won't say it's broken, but it's challenging, right? The cost is too much for parents. The wages are too low for the workers, and the profits aren't nearly high enough for the business operators. So I can't think of any other industry that exists that doesn't work for the consumer, the employee, or the business owner. So the things that we can do to sort of improve this and adjust this, I think, are going to be the benefit of all. So let me pause there. I do know we have a panel, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have right now, too. Yes?
The first slide, basically where you're looking at, did you say that was using percentages? I mean, you weren't able to do surveys, so.
Correct.
Yeah. So those percentages that you're looking at, was that like, what'd you say, 85%?
Yeah, I pegged it at 82% because the national studies we come across say anywhere between 80 and 85% of children under the age of 5 require full-time child care.
Okay.
So,
yes. So is that's not looking at any, that wasn't broke down. I mean, there's a big difference between Hardin County and
that's
New
right.
York City.
That's right.
That's right. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the cost and the capacity and the number of people that would be impacted are all important as well. Now, I blew through it here. I summarized it, sort of aggregated at the high level for ease of interpretation. But in the report itself, we break it down county by county by county for all of these, what the numbers are, what the seats would be required, things of that nature.
You know it by county? Or
Based on the current capacity and the population. So if we know the population of children in the county, we know the current capacity of child care centers or sites in the county, we can take those two factors and apply that sort of 82% ratio and get a pretty solid estimate of what that number would be. They are estimates, though. That's fair. It is an estimate. It's defensible, but it is an estimate.
And that's a great point. This is maybe what I call the meta study. There was no, to get that actual sampling data would have cost an order of magnitude more than we funded.
That's it. And that's the nice thing about this. We offer this a nice alternative where we can, and again, it's rigorous. I won't say academic. I've been in that field for a while, but it's rigorous and it's defensible, and we really take the modeling seriously. So, and we can do that based on brain power and not manpower out here trying to find hundreds and hundreds of people to talk to and get a big enough sample to say anything meaningful about it. So, thank you.
But the current capacity line,
yes,
those are actual numbers?
Yes, that was reported by KY Stats, what the current capacity is. Yep. And that's aggregated again all together, but that numbers, the details in the report are available by county. So, yes. Good. Great. Yes.
Okay. 2 points.
Yes.
One, I think looking at the income, the state income tax being 4.5 to 5.7 million, fantastic. But on another level, it's a good reminder for those in the room as we're continuing to lower the state income tax to make it zero. That's 4.5 to 5.7 million going back to the taxpayer's pocket, into the family's pocket, so they can have more money. So I just wanted to point that out.
That's great.
And this might be too nitty gritty, but it's my brain. So when we're looking at the capacity by county and program, is it eligibility accounted for in those numbers?
No, it's not. Yeah. Now, I guess it would be. Let me back up. In things like Head Start, it would be implicit because those are numbers that are reported. So those are the folks that are eligible for Head Start program.
Yeah. Okay. And the reason I bring that up is to just I like to share information. Obviously, my nice little PowerPoint up there. When we're talking about preschool, that is in Kentucky, it's eligibility required, and so you are eligible if you have a disability or income, and so looking at the drug epidemic, that's encouraging. That's increasing the number of kids that have learning disabilities, or it could be poverty too, and so I think that's just something for us to look at in our as we continue with the conversation of the scope. In the conversation of the child care challenges, we've got to recognize that and the poverty in our area. So, it's just food for thought. Thanks.
Oh, it's great. No, it's great. I won't wade into politics of all that with the universal pre-K or anything like that, but I will say that the two biggest jumps in female labor participation in the United States came with the onset of universal kindergarten and then the onset of the Head Start program in the 60s. So when those things happen, female labor force participation goes up, and just food for thought when you think about the pros and cons of universal basic income. Any other questions? That's great. You guys are great audience. I appreciate your attention.
Let's have a round of applause. So we could have a break, but we're not going to. We're going to go full steam ahead, and that gets you home a little bit earlier too, which is great. But we're going to invite all the presenters to come up for panel discussion. So Brian, Daniel, and Representative Hebron, if you could come up as well into these wonderful, comfortable chairs here. We're also going to invite Rachel Ritchie to come up, and she's really, in a lot of ways, the face of why we're talking about this, because she has been able to go through this experience of having twins, 5-year-old twins, and having worked, and now having to try to navigate the child care system to be able to come back into the workforce. So we'll invite them all up here. I'm going to say this, there are dumb questions, but I'm sure you won't ask them. So ask whatever questions you might have. I encourage you to write down your thoughts and ask that question, because I feel confident that if you have the question, 10 other people in the room will say, yeah, I was wondering about that too. So at the end of the panel discussion, we're going to have a chance to ask questions, and so be prepared for your part of the engagement. Okay? Oh yeah, you give it to them. I'll talk loud like Brian. I don't think I can talk as loud as Brian. Brian could have run for president in 1896 without a PA. So he could project very well. Okay, so we've introduced Rachel. Glad to have her on the panel. We're going to start with Rachel. So she's got the mic now. So as I mentioned, and you can give your story better than I can, but a 17-year-old daughter and 2 5-year-old twins. Previously working at Magnolia Bank and now coming back into the workforce. So Rachel, if you could tell us about your decision to leave the workforce and just when you had your twins and how you made that decision and what you're dealing with in the child care scenario.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. So back when I had my daughter, of course she's 17 now, so that was a long time ago. I was young. We had no choice but to work in child care. Back then with one child, wasn't that difficult. We had her in a great infancy program, which then transitioned to a Christian-based pre-K, preschool type environment where she stayed through kindergarten and then moved on to elementary school, which were in the E-Town School District. So that was fine. We had no issues. Right before I had my daughter, I was hired on at Magnolia Bank. That's what I consider my first big job. Excuse me. I worked at, throughout the end of my high school and beginning of college, I worked at a daycare, crazy enough. It was actually Severance Valley Church, had like an after-school program, and I loved it. My dream growing up was always to be an elementary school teacher. That's what I was going to school for. Obviously life happened, things change. So fast forward to getting hired on at Magnolia Bank, I started pretty much from the bottom. I started as a receptionist, worked my way up. At the end of my career, I was the assistant to our senior vice president. I was a loan processor. I absolutely loved my job. I felt important, I felt valued, that was my home. We had, of course, having my daughter young, there was a big age gap in between our kids. We struggled with what is called secondary infertility, which then went on to, I had some issues, we can't have kids. Thankfully enough, we're grateful and we're blessed that my grandparents and my mother, who are now passed away, had left some inheritance, which we ended up having to go the route of IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, which is it's not cheap, it's very expensive. But our dream was, we wanted, not a big family, but we didn't want our daughter to be single child. So fast forward, went through all that. We were blessed with a great treatment plan. Ended up pregnant. When we found out it was twins, we were like, whoa, this was not on our bingo card for this year, but nonetheless, here we are. So major shock. We were grateful, we were blessed, we were thankful. I had all intentions of going back to work. When we found out it was twins, I was like, okay, this changes things. 2 infants, they require a lot of care. I didn't get to experience raising my daughter. I mean, I did, but you know, she was in school, she was in daycare, I was working. So with the boys who are identical, we made a decision for me to stay home. While I was pregnant, about halfway through my pregnancy, I did search around for local daycares just to get kind of price quotes, see what we had. We had about 3 that were our top choices. One of them had over a year wait, so I was like, okay, that one's kind of out. The other 2 were either extremely expensive for 2. I mean, because now we're not just thinking, you know, $400 for one. It was going to actually cost somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 a month just for the 2 babies to go to daycare. Which, I mean, I had a decent paying job. I wasn't on the top tier of the payroll scale, but that's a lot of money. So, I mean, it was going to dramatically affect my take-home pay. So, with all of that, me having the opportunity to stay home with the boys, my husband is self-employed, so he runs his own business. So, I mean, that in itself is difficult. It's long hours. So we decided for me to stay home. I loved it. The first year, I'm a baby person. I love the babies. If I could have all the babies and keep them babies, I would. But the first year was great. I mean, I had family to help. You know, of course, here I am just in the throes of being mom. I had told myself, definitely when the boys got school age, I wanted to go back to work. I wanted to go back to Magnolia because that was my comfort zone, that was my safe spot. And about 2 years in, I kind of started looking around and realizing that daycare was just, I mean, finding the affordability and availability for 2 kids to get placed was so difficult. We were a Christian-based family, so I really wanted that Christian-based education for them. And it wasn't available. So fast forward to now, my kids, I attempted when they were about 3, I attempted and I thought, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna homeschool. I can do this, I can get all the stuff, all the paperwork. Well, I don't know if you've ever tried to homeschool your own children. They don't listen to mom like they do teachers, okay? So, you know, we attempted, I was excited, and they were like, no mom, I want a snack, I wanna go outside and play, I don't wanna do this. So it got to a point where I was like, okay, they need, before I send them to kindergarten and just wreck these kindergarten teachers, my kids are good, but they're 5, they're boys, they're wild, you know? So I was like, they need to be in some kind of a pre-K. They need to get the environment of a school-type setting before they're just, here we go, boys, you're going 7:30 to 3:30, good luck. You know, they're used to doing what they want at home. I mean, not doing what they want, but kind of being on their own schedule. So we, thankfully, somehow, I don't even know how it happened, I had called one of our local Christian schools, and I said, do you have availability for pre-K? She said, I've only got 1 spot. And I was like, well, that doesn't work because I got to send both of them. I can't send one without the other. So she said, well, let me see if I can rearrange and I'll give you a call back. Well, she never called, so I was like, okay, great, we're out. So I tried one more time, last ditch effort, like, please, can you just get both of them? They really need it. She said, I can squeeze you in for half day. I'm like, deal. I mean, that's 9 to 12, better than nothing. So we got them in, and it's still, I mean, just for 9 to 12, I mean, I'll be honest, we paid $550 a month just for the 2 boys, which is only, you know, 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday, but still 3 hours a day. And I love them there. They have been absolutely amazing. But as much as being a stay-at-home mom and running a house and raising the kids, like, that's an extremely important job. I mean, that is extremely valuable, but it doesn't pay the bills. I mean, it doesn't put groceries on the table. Thankfully, you know, my husband has had a decent, income and has been able to support us, but I feel guilty as the mom. Like, I can't contribute while being a stay-at-home mom and taking care of the babies. Like, yeah, that's great. That's a huge contribution, but I mean, who's paying? You know, we still have groceries. We still have activities. We've got, you know, medical expenses. My oldest has a slight medical issue right now. So the medical and the bills, they just keep adding, and I just feel guilty not being able to help provide. So I've been applying. Right now, this situation is, in order to work a 9 to 5 job, you need that after-school daycare. You know, I'm trying to get into a school system to where I have somewhat of the same hours as the kids, so I don't have to worry about that post 3:30 childcare. And at the same time, that's difficult. You know, I mean, it's really hard to find the childcare availability for that after-school hours. So that's kind of where I am. I've loved being a stay-at-home mom. It's been the most absolute difficult job I've ever had in my entire life. But it's rewarding, and our children are blessings and we love them, but I just feel like that early, especially for like 3, 4, 5-year-old, that pre-K early education is super important. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you, Rachel. What a great way to really put a face and a real emotional understanding to this. And as I was thinking about the benefits, Cliff, that we talked about, there's an emotional cliff too in all of this, right? Of this decision about, do I stay home, do I work? What are the challenges for the family when we do that? So thank you for your comments. Any questions for Rachel, or anything that came to your mind as she was kind of talking about the obstacles that she saw in trying to find affordable and quality childcare for her family? Come back.
Kirk, I'm going to intrude. I think you brought up a great point with the after-school care, and I guess, Brian, from your perspective, is that part of the consideration, because that does impact?
It does. It was not included in this study. We kind of left it at that because that's sort of a whole other animal and a different bucket of sort of youth to account for. But it certainly is. It should be part of the equation. So that's really fair, and I think that's important to understand as you look at these numbers. It's part of the solution. The after-school thing also needs to be a consideration as well.
And just as you mentioned that, I thought to myself, when schools close unexpectedly, from an industry standpoint, it is a nightmare, because you see what parents go through because they're depending on school to provide childcare. They jump through a lot of hoops, and that's exactly what you're facing, Rachel. Any other comments or questions for Rachel?
I'd just like to add from a rural perspective. I live in Painville in Meade County. There are no formal childcare centers in my, within a 20-minute driving radius. Luckily, I commute here to E-Town, so we were able to make it work. I like the hoop jumping analogy. Luckily, my kids are older now, but I think especially being cognizant of those childcare deserts, especially in the after-school space. I'm very lucky that I have in-laws that watch my kids. They're old enough now that I just hope they don't burn the place down before I get home. But I think that's a piece that is often unseen as well, in terms of just that reliance on family and the privilege that comes with that. And I'm lucky that I get to work. I'm grateful that I don't have to pick between being an employee and being a mom. But it's only the fact that I'm not sitting on that same seat is just because I was lucky enough to have family help piece things together. And I just don't know that everyone's in that same situation. So I think looking at those desert areas where there's literally very few formal options outside of in-home care that maybe you can stumble across, it's especially important to shine a light on that. So thank you for sharing your experience and just talking about the complexity of this issue. I don't think we'd be here if it was a silver bullet. We just need more of this one type, but especially thinking about those more rural parts of our region is important too.
Great comment. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other thoughts or questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question. Rachel, thank you again for your story. It's so powerful and important to hear from the mother's perspective, right? A question I have for you. You touched on it, but I don't think it's been really said, and I believe we touch on it in the recommendations, is bringing mothers back to work, right? During your time that you've been applying for jobs, have you felt anxious or anxiety when you're applying for jobs, and unfortunately there's that gap? Do you feel maybe that you may be disqualified or discounted just because of that? And how can employers help people like you and stay-at-home mothers if they're looking for more jobs, coming back to the workforce? How can they maybe look at a different narrative?
Sure, yeah. So.
I'm sorry, that might be too personal of a question, but I think it's important to ask.
I'm a complete open book. It's totally fine. So, prior, when I was younger, we had my daughter at 21, 22. Way young. We didn't even know what we were doing, but that's fine. You live and you learn, you figure it out as you go. Back then, of course, I had never, like I said, I compared Magnolia to my big girl job. I had never had a 9 to 5. I had never had, I was the daycare. I was the mall retail, that kind of employment. So getting hired on, I mean, I felt super proud of myself. I was a big girl now. Having the boys, I had to I almost lost myself in a sense. Like being a stay-at-home mom, like, you know, I went from every day at the bank, dressed up, had makeup, my hair done, nice heels, you know, all that, to now I'm in, do I ever get out of my pajamas? Some days, no. I mean, do we brush our hair every day? Maybe not. You know, it's just, you really go from a sense of, I'm important in the business corporate world, to now I'm a mom, which, don't get me wrong, is absolutely important, but you lose yourself. I mean, now I have become nothing but identified as mom. I at their beck and call, I'm changing diapers, I'm getting endless snacks. Like, it's just, it's a lot, and you feel like you lose yourself. So now that I'm back into, and I've done some of, you know, all the side gigs, the network marketings and things like that, which is, it's fun, and for me it was more of something I enjoyed. You know, I was in like the skincare makeup. I enjoyed that, so maybe it was something that I could find myself again, which was great for a little bit of time, but I couldn't work full-time network marketer. I'm not the social butterfly. I mean, I talk, but I'm just not, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not that type of person. So now, you know, my dream was always to be an elementary school teacher. So I love, like, if you get me in a room full of kids, I'll talk to them all day long. Get me in a room full of adults, I'm nervous. Like, I feel like I don't know what to say or what to connect. So going back into looking for a job, like what do I do? Like what are my purposes? Like what can I offer? And I always knew I wanted to be in like the school district. So, you know, some of the places that I've applied for are in that school type setting, and I'm nervous as could be. If I get, you know, elementary, I feel fine, but like the high school kids, I couldn't. I mean, I'm raising a high schooler, and that's as much of that as I need. But as far as, you know, the nervous, trying to find yourself again after 5 years of being a stay-at-home mom, it's difficult. As far as, you know, employers helping, I don't know that I have an answer for that. You know, I mean, I think that each person has a unique issue presented. You know, everybody has their own, whether it's low income, you can't find, you know, for us, I don't have a lot of, I mean, we have great family, but my mom, who's passed away now, she was with my daughter, she helped every chance she could. My dad's just not, most men aren't really the hands-on with the kids. You know, I mean, they'll play with them, but as far as babysitting for 8 hours a day, that's another question. You know, my husband's parents, they're older, they live over, you know, 45 minutes away, so it's not as easy to just hop in the car and come down the street to help with the kids. So I think as far as employers, you know, if there were, and not many employers want to say, okay, I'll hire you to work from 8 to 3:30, and then when your kids are out of school, you can go home. I mean, that's not fair to everybody else that's in that employment office as well. So I don't really know what the fix is as far as employers being able to help some of these people getting back into the workforce, but just being aware that, yeah, you know, there's times that kids are going to be sick. You can't control that, you know, and a limited amount of sick time, you know, you're going to use it up. So I don't know, there's just things like that have to be considered, you know, especially when you have multiple children. You know, I've got 2 5-year-olds. One gets sick, 95% chance within the next week the other one's going to be sick. So here I am out multiple days for, you know, multiple kids with illnesses. So I don't know if that answered the question or not, but.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll just make a comment on that. I mean, I think, you know, probably every woman here can just identify with everything that Rachel is saying. And as employers, we think about that all the time. I'm going to say it this way. The pool of available employees is small, and they are unavailable for many reasons. Some of those reasons, frankly, make them unemployable. And that's a challenge that we have every day. So we think a lot about how we can make a shift or a work situation that is appealing to somebody who has the cognitive skills, is dependable, will show up to work every day. And so that's in our minds all the time. And so I appreciate your talking about what things can we do to make a work environment more appealing to a bright and capable stay-at-home parent to get back into the workforce in a way that would work for them. So there were several hands that were up, so go ahead.
Yes, just wanted to add to what you're saying. my experience, I was a stay-at-home mom. I had no choice. My son has special needs. So I stayed home for 10 years. And so my job experience, was kind of just null and void. Like, nobody cared. And I also was, 10 years ago, making way less an hour than people are today. So I experienced the barriers of, one, nobody wanting to hire me because I had a 10-year gap in employment, but then also trying to get appropriate wages when they ask, how much did you make, at your last job? Well, that was over 10 years ago. So that was a tough obstacle. It took me years to get to a point where I could afford to pay the bills, as a single parent. And also computer programs, that was a huge one too. I didn't know how to do modern Excel and Word because so much had changed since, I stayed at home. So there's like multiple obstacles that, parents are going through that I think a lot of workforces don't even consider, that we should be given a chance, first of all, and also be paid appropriately despite that gap in employment.
Thanks, Andrew. Great comment. So I think we're probably, go ahead, Nikki.
So I work on Fort Knox, so for the childcare centers, and I have been on the other side of like the interviews where stay-at-home moms are wanting to go back to work when their children start school. So what we're running into a lot is the whole 8 to 2, this is what I can work, but we're at a point at the childcare centers where we have to take what we can get because we don't have anybody working. So I can understand, where you're coming from saying, hey, well, it's not really fair to those other people, but that's where we're at right now. So, they haven't been working, but this is what we have to deal with, is now we have to only have people that work. So that's a struggle that we're dealing with.
You have to accommodate your schedule to work with the workforce that's available. Rachel, great comments. Thank you for your really honesty and vulnerability, really, just to talk about the situation. We really appreciate that. Daniel, so I think this is really the face of the challenge that we're facing. And can you tell me just why LTAD championed this and what role they're going to play in identifying solutions for the future?
Yeah, so first thing I want to do, Kurt, is thank Rachel for participating, not just participating, but as you said, being vulnerable, being face this. This is not easy. Not easy to sit in front of people and tell a personal story. In fact, we did a Facebook call, if you will, put out feelers for someone to step forward and do this. And obviously a lot of people were nervous in doing that. And she has a vested interest in this volunteer to say, hey, this is a problem. I want to be part of the solution. I absolutely will participate. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate that, Rachel, because I know it is hard. So for me, Kurt, I'll highlight this is both personal and professional for me. So I have a friend that often reminds me, thankfully, that we're all guilty of the bubble, that the experiences within the bubble we live in. I grew up with 3 brothers, had a stay-at-home mom. Childcare was never a thought to me. Fast forward, married with 3 daughters, and it's a complete different experience and wake-up call. So I hear them, they're at the age where they're thinking about children. And so they're having discussions, okay, what does childcare look like for me? I want to have kids and a career. And so when you're looking at that, do I stay at home? Do I go part-time? What's the impact on the family? It becomes a dichotomy of what do I pick? Why can't I have both? And so there's a personal nature there that I think we all forget, and Rachel highlighted that perfectly. The self-worth that becomes involved in that is very real. And that has an impact on all of us. She's outside of the workforce, as are many mothers. Just let's be clear, it impacts females overwhelmingly more than it does males. She's out of the workforce, wants to be in the workforce, doesn't want to have to choose between family and work, but has to. The impact of that now that she goes in, she's 5 years behind. She talked about that. And we look at the wage gaps across our industry, particularly for females. This is a big reason for that. And so when we started hearing about this problem, it was personal for me, and hearing that new experience with daughters and what they're going through. Second, hearing from a state legislator that is spearheading this issue, needing real-time data to address it. We know it's a problem. but how big of a problem is it? What's the return on investment? What are the personal stories involved in this? And how can we fix it? Hearing from local governments, we have two very good judge executives in the room today, Judge Tall and Judge Cho, who will tell you running a county is very hard and there's never enough money. So there's a revenue aspect to this that we look at. There's a workforce, like you heard, Tom, all the employers in the room. We never have enough employees. So it was really that connection for us. The ad district is never, we are not an organization that's a solution looking for a problem. Our board of directors want us to look at problems that we can reasonably have input on and solve. Not just have a study to set on the shelf and say, yay, we check the box. If we can get involved and solve the problem, that's where we're going to go. And so we saw this confluence of really where it meets our mission. We have almost 300,000 residents in our region, 8 counties and 27 cities. We have a workforce, workforce board that's involved in this. Our mission, our why, is to do those things for our local governments and our citizens they can't do for themselves. So all of that coming together, we were the perfect integrators, collaborators to meet that mission. Hey, this is not a problem. This is a problem that no one on their own can solve together. It's going to take all of us. Let's get everyone in the room and solve this problem. And so we had the blessing, really, to bring everyone together and get in this room and solve this problem. And it's really, I want to highlight again, Brian did a great job in his presentation, but let's highlight again what problems this solves. Revenue. So you look at, let's just say $5 million this ad district giving back to the state in tax revenue. There are 15 ad districts across the state. So 5 times 15, you're about $90 million. If all things were equal, we're about the middle of the pack in terms of size. So that number is bigger. That's a big number. You look at local income, again, middle of the pack, roughly $1 million in local occupational tax coming back in. Multiply that across the state, that's $15 million. Gross regional product, 200, let's just call it $200 million. Payroll, 125. Not to mention the personal aspect of this. Again, multiply all that times 15 across the state, and you realize what a huge problem this is. And what that rising tide then raises all boats from an emotional perspective, a professional perspective, and a financial perspective. And the ad district, and I would argue all our ad districts, and this will be momentum that we catch all across the state, will now be involved in this issue because it's the right place for this and bringing everyone in the room together to make this happen and provide a solution for all of us.
Thank you, Daniel. And we all appreciate LTAD's leadership role here and your personal role in it, and I'm grateful for that. The saying that comes to mind is the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. And so Brian, as you have worked with many other organizations that are trying to tackle the same problem, other communities and states, can you just talk to us about some of the trees that are being planted, right? Some innovative solutions that are out there for.
Sure. So I think, we've touched on a couple of them through the course of the discussion, but really there's been a lot of employer collaborative. There's been some momentum around that where the idea, again, with like the industrial park example, we've got 4 or 5 resident employers. What can we do? How can we pool resources and provide childcare that's exclusive to our employees? So that's one that's getting a lot of momentum as well. A tri-share model is something that's gotten a lot of momentum up in Northeast Indiana, which again was inspired by some of the trailblazing work here in Kentucky. But they looked at it, listen, if the employer pays 1/3 of the cost, and the employee pays 1/3 of the cost, and the state pays 1/3 of the cost, everybody comes out ahead. So we all share the burden, and we all move forward in there. Now, there's been some seed money in Indiana put in place to help with some of this, and I thought this was really, really important. And the earlier comments by the representative was, taking away the pilot name. Because in Indiana, there's this pot of money, but employers have been hesitant to tap into it because it's one-time grant funding. And when it's gone, then what happens? Now, am I on the hook to keep this momentum going for my employees? Or Or am I going to just have to cancel the program and get it back into them? So that's just one of the pitfalls of sort of making sure, sort of calming some of the fears, and rightfully so, that employers might have about having to foot a larger share of the bill moving forward, and they're not budgeting for it. So those are some examples, and we talked a little bit, of course, about smaller sort of entrepreneurial sites. And again, we didn't get into the quality or the star ratings. Those are very, very important, but we didn't dig into all of that. But the answer is there's lots of answers. Home-based childcare, all of those things can happen. And how some collaboratives are coming together. In fact, in other areas, it's also the economic development team that's coming together. What can we do on the back end? Can we help with shared payroll? Can we pool our resources for insurance for our employees? What benefits can we offer? So again, these sort of smaller entrepreneurial mindset coming together, pulling resources to tackle some of the bigger admin costs behind the scenes to keep those costs down. And then one other thing I would mention that I think is very important is really what we're going to do after this is starting with getting the community together, convening. Who's the convener? Who's driving the conversation? It's one of those things, I think, as Daniel set up perfectly. It impacts everybody, but nobody can tackle it alone. So who's going to do it? Who's going to bring us together? How are we going to get that started? So we've had a lot of really good momentum. There's one in Hamilton County, which is an affluent county in Indiana, that we're working with them very closely right now to stand up a full-time task force that turns into a community collaborative and try to get people invested in moving the ball forward. But I think getting them to understand the scope of the problem, and it impacts everybody, not just folks that have kids, but it's a driver of the economy and the tax revenue and everything further on down the line, is an important first step.
Great comment. As you were talking about it, first of all, say that TPMA did a great. The research is top notch. I think the way the data was presented, and I think the realistic kind of ranges that were presented, I think they're, what do I know? But I feel good about them. I've seen how it was developed, and I feel good about them. And ultimately, from an industry standpoint and from any business standpoint, you're looking for return on investment. And you talked about there are many things you can think about as far as workforce, immigration, automation, and other sources of people returning to the workforce. And we're a company that sells automation solutions, and our sales on that side are through the roof. Because many companies are saying, here's another way we can solve this problem. We can make it so that there's less jobs out there because it's hard to hire people. And I think there's a place for that, but as you say, it has to be something where an employer is looking at their return on investment. I think this helps to kind of identify the potential return on investment.
And that pace will influence market forces too. The longer those shortages go on, the faster the pace of automation is going to be.
Go ahead.
So, number one, I want to thank you all for allowing Hart County to be part of this. This is just looking at the comparison of capacity by counties alone, and you can see Hart County is definitely in a big disadvantage. So I've got cut out early today, but I would ask this because I don't get as involved up this way as I would like sometimes, but some examples of some of these industrial park type situations, because I know we have talked, I've already had a discussion with our larger employer there in the county of the possibility of getting 2 or 3 of our larger employers together to kind of co-op is the way I put it. Some way that everybody can put a little in and be a big help. So if you have any examples, something we can visit or I can take back to my people, because obviously this gives me something to start taking more action on, but looks great. Thank you all for allowing us
Thank
to be
you.
part
So
of it.
let me direct you to our Senior Director of Business Development behind you, Jonathan Ferris, who can answer this. You can connect with him now or offline, whatever works best for you.
Just really quickly, there's a great example from Ashland, Ohio, where they have seed funding that's come through a community foundation, and they have $1 million endowment that they've set up. And so they're working with employers, they've set rates in place, they have a 150-seat childcare facility that's located within their industrial park. So if y'all know Barbasol Shaving Cream, literally a minute down the road, that's where they make all the shaving cream. But they have this facility, it's starting, their rates are very affordable, and they're making a run at it. So I'll send you some information.
Great.
Yep.
They just did something similar in Somerset, Kentucky as well. The Industrial Foundation, I think, maybe subsidized or donated the land. And then they put out RFPs for the provider.
Yeah.
And then it's in the industrial park, the industries in the area got to sit down, meet with those providers that submitted an RFP and select the provider there. And I think it's a 200 seat childcare center. So Chris Girdler is the economic development director. He'd be happy to talk to you there as well.
That'll help.
Yeah,
Those
absolutely. And that's
examples.
something we're gonna tackle in the task force as well, provide those examples. And there's some interest in, I don't want to put anybody in the room on the spot, but there's some interest among our business and industrial base here to possibly do just that, here as an example as well. So you'll hear more information than that, I promise.
Great.
John, next time I hope you bring some Sister Shiva rolls.
We'll do that.
You know, the other thing that you know, these 8 to 2 jobs, sometimes we've called them mother's hours. That's probably not the right term now, but we understand those are the hours that a lot of people want. But we run 24/7, and we struggle to find people at night shifts. And so we have moved to, for example, offering 6-hour shifts, not a 12-hour shifts, with some limited benefits. Now, trying to connect that with the right workforce has been a challenge for us. And so helping, I think, people who are looking to come back into the workforce to think about some non-traditional ways to come back into the workforce, but to still bless their families, is something that we're working to do as well. So, great comments. Representative Hebron, you did such a great job of presenting all the things that are going on in Frankfurt. Can you just talk a little bit more about the obstacles that you're facing both in Frankfurt and locally to provide affordable and quality child care?
Yes, thank you, Kurt. You know, I think one thing I really hit on, is it on?
Yeah, it is.
I've got to use the mic, his wife Grace here. Yeah, I know, so I was thinking, I was like, I'm not on the last. Thanks, Kirk. No, you know, one of the obstacles I think is education portion. You know, I talked about how it is important for us to be having these conversations. You know, I want to really praise Daniel and Lincoln Trail. You know, not every state representative and state senator has someone, an ad district that they can go to and see, be on the same page. You know, everyone's so different, so we really are lucky here to have Daniel's leadership and the board of directors to see the bigger picture. When I started in 2022, these conversations, especially on House Bill 499, it's kind of like my baby, is what I feel like. So I want to see it grow and succeed. You know, one thing was I went to every member in my caucus and I said, this is how much child care costs in your district. And it was anywhere between $6,000 and $9,000, and people were shocked because they didn't know. And it's not their fault they didn't know. You know, as a legislator, we have a lot of different issues that come to us. I joke a lot that my very first email I received was about bee pesticides. Who in this room cares about bee pesticides? You know, but that's one of my constituents who really cares about that. And so when I have these conversations, I've got to think, you know, we've got 45,000 people in state house areas and state house districts that have 45,000 different issues. And so one thing I think we can do, you know, something I know I can do better is continue to have conversations with Judge Tall and my judge in Grayson County and the magistrates and talk about, hey, this is an issue. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about policy, it's about getting people on your team. It's about building the relationships and educating them and saying, hey, this is a big deal. Let's continue to talk. So the education portion and making sure that people recognize this is a really big deal. You know, I think one thing, and Waves here, I'm going to still say it, you know, I'm 32 years old and I don't have kids yet. And that's a real stressor for me, is trying to figure out, well, can I still be a legislator and be a mom? Can I, you know, I live an hour and 45 minutes away in a time zone difference from Frankfurt. Can I do that and be adequate? You know, my mom has said I get to, you know, I can retire April 1st, 2024. I'm like, well, I got to find a husband first. You know, but I'm so thankful I have that, because not everyone does. And so it is personal to me, because I want to get this to work, because someday when I get blessed with children, I want to be able to have that. But also, that's why I got elected, that's why I ran for office too, is because workforce issues. How do we get people to live the very best lives that they can? And to me, removing the barrier with childcare, I mean, you see that's over 2,000 people that can have a better life than what maybe they're having right now. And go living, you know, being raised by a single mom, we live paycheck to paycheck. And, you know, being able to give people that more comfort. And so I think they can have a better life. And so to me, it's also dreaming big and sharing those ideas. And even though people look at me like I'm crazy sometimes, it's worth it, because it could really change and make a difference. And so 2 years when I started this, 2 years ago. I never thought I would be here today, being able to present on this and sharing, and us actually on a task force to make a difference in our community. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity, so excited to get down to business, but really ready to have the hard conversations too.
Great, thank you, Representative. So circling back to what you talked about, Daniel, this task force that's been formed, can you talk a little bit about the task force, what their remit is, and what's the timeline for execution?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. Again, we have brought together all the people who need to be in the room, cross-section of our economy here within the region. Our executive committee picked this team, signed off on this team. It's very representative of chambers, industry, government, all aspects of business, as well as our board of directors and workforce. So we have all the right people in the room to address this issue, and not just be an event today with a study that goes on the shelf. We are going to produce solutions. Now, what the private sector does with that, what Representative Heverin is able to do in the legislature, because that all depends on external factors and other people, let's be fair. That obviously is a different discussion for another day. But we will produce meaningful results and recommendations. Because who in this room as an employer doesn't want Rachel? You have, as a result, we've identified 2,035 Rachels. You'll probably get job offers today. You did that great of a job.
HR exec's here, he's already.
I knew it'd be tough. And so you look at that, and we can change a life. We can change our economy. We can change the outlook of our local governments. We can change workforce. We can make it easier for Jake to hire. We can make it easier for Kurt to hire and do great things. That's something special. It's not being done anywhere else in the state. We'll be after this, but it's not currently. And that's groundbreaking, pioneering, and all our folks that are on this task force volunteered, willingly accepted, I want to be part of the solution. And these are high-producing, high drivers who will not sit on their laurels. They are going to drive and drive hard. What we're going to identify today in our first task force meeting are the quick wins and the longer range wins. And those are two very distinct things. So we're going to look at 6 months, 1 year, and more than 1 year in terms of what the goals are that we can achieve. We're going to set that up. We'll do monthly meetings. We have a great chairman of this task force, in Lance Blanford, who understands this issue better than anyone else in the state. Is involved with the school system. Again, child care owner, involved in workforce in every aspect as part of our workforce board, has been involved in drafting legislation. Just a key highlight of the leadership and what we have involved in this task force. So we're going to see high results, high production as a result of those folks in the room. I'm excited about that.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. So we've got 4 superstars up here. What questions do you have? What's come to your mind that you haven't been able to have answered so far? Any questions for this team of experts?
I just got a comment, and I know that we've talked a lot about barriers for her and for the people that have the kids, but I think are there, and I'm just asking questions, and that may be something to come out of that. What are the barriers for opening a child care center? What are the barriers on the child care centers that are currently open?
Let me answer that.
Yeah.
So not just as an employer, but as the husband of a wife who's a pre-K and JK director for a large Catholic community in Louisville, Kentucky, I hear about these issues every day as well, and the challenges that she and her team face. And, the cost of operating a daycare center, as I was telling Judge Stahl before we started, if you don't already have a low-cost center, bricks and mortar, something that's affordable, because 3 of our Baptist Health hospitals actually do have on-site daycare facilities, but they were built back in the 80s and 90s. They're fully depreciated. They don't have an ongoing cost other than upkeep, which is reasonable. So you have a large cost of opening or leasing a facility. Now, the other issue that I was going to specifically talk about is exactly what we said earlier this morning, and that is in the government's attempt to help through pandemic times, increasing the average cost of child care workers' wages, now we've set a new expectation, and it is very difficult to recruit child care workers. And so unless you're paying them $22, $23, $25 an hour, you're not finding them, which just increased the burden of capacity multifold, because you subsequently also don't have that ability to run and or add, because people can't afford the new rates. You can't afford $1,500 a month for child care. Yet that's what Lance and others who run daycare operations face every day. So that's the other problem that we've got to solve. We've got to figure out how to get the affordability of this back into the equation. And you know, it may be looking at the national operators out there who can scale, who have the scale that sometimes local does.
And here's the crazy spiral there. As we increase worker wages so they can pay for childcare, that becomes the new market rate for a childcare professional.
Correct.
And their wages go up, and then they can
Correct.
afford it again. So it's a problem.
Can I add a comment real quick? A conversation I hear a lot is, well, if the government would release the regulatory burden on child care centers, and I think that's a catch-22. Because in a previous administration, they went through and did a ton of red tape cutting, and then the federal government came back and said, you can't get federal dollars if you get rid of these regulations. And so a lot of the regulations we have are from the federal government. But this past session, we actually had, it's interesting, we had a martial arts center in Rockcastle County, and they provide a snack for their martial arts students. Well, the cabinet wanted to regulate them because they were a child care center because they provided a snack. And they're like, no, we don't provide child care. We have lessons and we provide a snack at the end. And so that was a piece of legislation we had to do, is like for programs like that, for dance and ballet, like those don't need to be regulated as a child care center, especially if you're there for an hour. And so I think it's finding the medium, and that's going to be part of it, is going through and trying to figure out, okay, well, is this, because it could be, a toothbrush. Does the toothbrush have a holder? Is it in the cup when they come and do the inspection? And so it is very tedious. But then also, you want to have good quality for your kids if you're sending them somewhere. And so I think it's a mix, but it's a worthwhile conversation to continue to have.
Great comment. Thank you, Representative Hubbard. Any other comments or questions that came to mind as we talked?
I'll just say that as far as county government, as soon as we understand what the barriers are, I think we can respond to those. I think all the magistrates that set up this report will if we understand what to do, especially if it's not costly, then we can move things forward. So I think that's going to be a key part of this communication. What can actually help us here? And it's a big problem, and I think we realize that. And just understanding how big the problem is, of course, is part of it too.
I'll just make a comment, and this is an anecdote, not data, but I think it's a situation that plays out all over the country. And this came from, I don't remember who, some at the federal level, the cabinet, and there was a podcast I was listening to. And they talked about a woman, single mother with children, who was working, but was struggling to find childcare. And so sometimes she was leaving her children, so maybe it's a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old home for a couple of hours so that she didn't miss her shift or whatever it might be because her child care fell through. I think that happens a lot. Mm-hmm. So CPS was called because the kids were making a racket or whatever. And there may have been other underlying problems, right? I don't really know. But CPS was called, and eventually her children were taken from her and put into the foster care system, where they were subsidized by foster care payments to the parents to take care of them, those children, so that they would have parents at home. And the point was, can't we find a better way to help the mom to take care of her children? And I think that's really what we're trying to find here, is a better way to help the mom or the dad, but almost always the mom, to take care of their children so that they can provide for them, find themselves, like Rachel said, and feel good about themselves, and raise kids who will continue to contribute to society. Any other thoughts or questions anybody has? We appreciate you being here. I know it's a long time, but what great information, how informative, and what a great just spirit of understanding that's been here. I've felt it, I know you have felt it. So we're thankful for everybody who's participated. Maybe we can give them a last round of applause.